1 year had passed since the uprising and the peace agreement that followed. Marcus stood on the observation deck of a research vessel that was truly unlike any ship he had ever seen. It was built jointly by human engineers and Zolth designers, a physical manifestation of the cooperation that now existed between the two species. The ship was called the Horizon, and its mission was to explore new frontiers while carrying medical expertise to colonies and settlements that had been isolated during the years of conflict. Marcus was no longer the prisoner or even the respected healer. He had become something far more important. He was the director of the Joint Medical Initiative, an organization dedicated to sharing medical knowledge between humans and Zolth, while also reaching out to other species who had suffered under Zolth oppression or human exploitation. The work was exhausting, but it was also deeply fulfilling in ways that his life had never been before. Kesh stood beside him on the observation deck. She had also changed in the past year. She was now the co-director of the research division, and she had become one of Marcus's closest friends. They had learned to communicate beyond the limitations of the telepathic translation devices, understanding each other through shared experience and mutual respect. Kesh told Marcus that they had received a distress signal from a human colony called New Haven. The colony had been ravaged by a disease that neither human nor Zolth medical databases had ever encountered before. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. This was exactly what the Horizon was designed for, but he had hoped they would have more time to prepare before facing such a critical situation. Still, he knew that delay was not an option. People were suffering and dying. He ordered the Horizon to alter course immediately toward New Haven. The journey took 2 weeks. During that time, Marcus and his medical team worked around the clock to prepare for what they might encounter. He reviewed everything they knew about human colony diseases, about environmental factors that could cause illness, and about potential treatments. But he also knew that preparation could only take him so far. Once they arrived at New Haven, they would need to improvise and adapt, just as he had done so many times before. New Haven was a sight that broke Marcus's heart. The colony, which had once been thriving and full of life, was now a place of suffering. People lay in makeshift hospital tents, their bodies weak and their eyes dim with pain. The disease seemed to attack the immune system, leaving victims vulnerable to infections that would normally be easily fought off. The colony's own medical facilities had been overwhelmed weeks ago. The director of the colony, a woman named Claire Foster, greeted Marcus with tears in her eyes. She told him that they had lost 300 people so far, and more were falling ill every day. Marcus immediately began examining patients and gathering information about how the disease spread and progressed. He discovered something interesting. The disease seemed to be environmental in origin, rather than contagious. Patients who had spent the most time outside the main colony buildings were the most severely affected. This suggested that something in the soil or water or air of New Haven was causing the illness. Marcus worked with a team of environmental scientists to test samples from around the colony. Within 3 days, they identified the culprit. A parasitic organism had contaminated the water supply. The organism was native to the planet where New Haven was located, and it had not been properly filtered during the initial colonization process. The parasite had slowly accumulated in the bodies of colony residents, weakening their immune systems and causing the diseases they now suffered from. But understanding the problem was only half the battle. Marcus needed to develop a treatment that would eliminate the parasite from the bodies of infected humans without causing additional harm. He consulted with Kesh and with the colony's own medical staff. Together, they developed a compound that would target the parasitic organisms and break down their protective shells, allowing the human immune system to recognize and destroy them. The first batch of the treatment was administered to the most critically ill patients. Marcus watched anxiously as the compound worked its way through their systems. For several tense hours, nothing seemed to happen. Then, gradually, he began to see improvement. The fever decreased. The color returned to their faces. By the next morning, the most critically ill patient was conscious and alert, asking for food and water. News of the successful treatment spread through New Haven like a lifeline. People who had lost hope began to believe that they might survive after all. Over the next 2 weeks, the treatment was distributed to all infected colony members. The results were remarkably consistent. The vast majority of patients recovered fully. A few suffered lingering effects, but even those patients experienced significant improvement. As the crisis subsided, Marcus realized that the people of New Haven wanted to celebrate him as a hero. They wanted to hold ceremonies in his honor and name buildings after him. Marcus found this uncomfortable. He understood that people were grateful, and he appreciated their thanks. But he did not want to be treated as special or superior. He tried to explain to Claire Foster that he had simply done what any good doctor would do. He had observed the problem, analyzed it carefully, and developed a solution. There was nothing heroic about that. Claire smiled and told Marcus something that changed his perspective. She said that in a time of plague and desperation, when hope seemed impossible, Marcus had arrived with knowledge and compassion. That was heroic, not because of the extraordinary nature of what he did, but because of the ordinariness of his kindness and his refusal to give up. She told Marcus that he should understand by now that sometimes the greatest acts of heroism were the simplest ones. Before the Horizon left New Haven, Marcus established a permanent medical station on the colony. He trained several of the colony's own medical personnel to recognize and treat the parasitic infection. He left detailed instructions and compounds that could be reproduced locally. He made it clear that the people of New Haven now had the tools they needed to manage their own medical challenges. His job was not to save them forever, but to teach them how to save themselves. As the Horizon pulled away from New Haven and set course for the next location that needed help, Marcus stood once again on the observation deck. Kesh joined him, and they watched the planet recede into the distance. Kesh told Marcus that they had received another distress call, this time from a Zolth settlement that had been isolated after the conflict, and now faced water contamination issues. The pattern was becoming clear. Across human and Zolth space, communities had been cut off and neglected during the years of division. Now those communities needed help, and Marcus was determined to provide it. But Marcus also understood something deeper. He realized that his true purpose was not simply to solve medical crises. His true purpose was to prove that cooperation between species could work, that humans and Zolth could work together not out of forced alliance, but out of genuine commitment to helping each other survive and thrive. Every settlement they visited, every life they saved, every person they trained in medical knowledge, all of it was building evidence that a better future was possible. Marcus looked at Kesh and smiled. She returned the smile, and in that moment of connection between human and Zolth, Marcus felt truly free for the first time since his capture. He was no longer a prisoner, no longer a tool of either civilization. He was a healer, a teacher, and a bridge between worlds. The work would never be complete. There would always be more people to help, more diseases to understand, more connections to build. But that was not a burden. That was a gift. That was a life worth living. The laboratory was in complete chaos. Scientists worked around the clock, barely stopping to sleep or eat. Holographic displays showed data streaming past at incredible speeds. Patients lay in medical beds in adjoining rooms, their conditions deteriorating by the hour. Marcus moved through the space like a man possessed, driven by a need he had never felt before. This plague was different from the first one he had encountered. It was smarter, more aggressive, and it did not discriminate between species. Kesh worked beside Marcus, her large, multifaceted eyes fixed on the microscope display. She had become his closest ally among the Zolth scientists, and her dedication matched his own. Together, they examined tissue samples from both human and Zolth patients. What they discovered troubled them deeply. The pathogen had evolved in a way that suggested it had been engineered. Someone had created this plague deliberately, but why? Who would benefit from a disease that killed both species? Marcus pushed the question aside for the moment. He could investigate the origins of the plague later. Right now, people were dying, and he needed to focus on finding a cure. He studied the genetic structure of the pathogen, looking for weaknesses. The plague attacked both human and Zolth cells differently, which was part of what made it so difficult to treat. A cure for the Zolth might be useless for humans and vice versa. Then Marcus had an idea. What if the cure did not need to work the same way for both species? What if he could create a compound that approached the problem from two different angles? The compound could contain two separate active ingredients, each designed to target the pathogen in a different species. The human portion of the compound would work like his previous treatments, blocking the protein that the pathogen used to enter human cells. The Zolth portion would use a different mechanism, attacking the pathogen's internal structure in a way that was lethal to the organism, but safe for Zolth physiology. Marcus began working on the theory immediately. He consulted with Kesh and with several other young Zolth scientists who had learned his methods well. They worked together through the night and the following day, running simulation after simulation. By the afternoon of the second day, they had created the first test batch of the compound. The results were extraordinary. In laboratory testing, the compound worked on both human and Zolth tissue samples. The pathogen could not survive in the presence of the compound, regardless of whether it was attacking human cells or Zolth cells. Marcus felt tears of relief stream down his face. They had done it. They had created something that could save both species. But there was still the matter of the uprising. The resistance was moving forward with their plan. Marcus knew this because Amanda had sent him a message indicating that the liberation operation would begin in just 2 days. He had to work quickly. He compiled all the information about the compound and sent it through the encrypted channel to the resistance. He included detailed instructions on how to synthesize the treatment and how to administer it to both human and Zolth patients. The message he sent with the compound was clear. He told Amanda that the uprising should proceed as planned, but that every human freed from the labor camps should receive the plague treatment immediately. He also told her that he would work to ensure that Zolth civilians would have access to the treatment as well. His goal was a future where both species could coexist, not a future where humans defeated Zolth or vice versa. Amanda's response came within hours. She acknowledged the compound and told Marcus that the resistance was ready. The uprising would begin at midnight on the following night. She also revealed something that Marcus had not known. The plague had indeed been engineered, created by a faction within the Zolth military that wanted to eliminate the human prisoners and destabilize the government. They believed that if the Empire fell into chaos, they could seize power and restore what they saw as true Zolth values. Commander Zarath was suspected of being involved in the conspiracy. Marcus was shocked but not entirely surprised. The timing of the plague, coming just as the resistance was planning their uprising, seemed too convenient to be a coincidence. But he had no time to worry about conspiracy and treachery. He had to prepare for what was coming. That night, Marcus made a crucial decision. He went to High Regent Solvin and told him the truth. He confessed that there was a human uprising planned for the following night. He told Solvin about the resistance and their plans to free prisoners. But he also told Solvin about the compound that could save both species from the plague. He explained that he had been working with both the Zolth government and the human resistance because he was committed to saving lives, not to favoring one side over the other. Marcus expected to be arrested immediately. He expected punishment for his betrayal, but High Regent Solvin simply listened. When Marcus finished speaking, Solvin told him something that surprised him completely. Solvin said that he had known about the resistance for weeks. His security forces had been monitoring Amanda and her contacts. Solvin had allowed them to operate because he wanted to see if they would act honorably or if they would slaughter innocent people to achieve their goals. Solvin explained that he had also suspected that someone within the government was responsible for the plague. He told Marcus that discovering this truth had forced him to face difficult questions about his own leadership and about whether the Zolth Empire's treatment of human prisoners was truly just. He said that Marcus had taught him something far more valuable than any medical treatment. Marcus had taught him that compassion and concern for life could exist within a warrior civilization. Solvin made an announcement to the Zolth government the following morning. He declared that the plague treatment would be distributed to all Zolth citizens immediately. He also announced that he was establishing a commission to investigate the creation of the plague and to determine who was responsible for this biological terrorism. He revealed that human prisoners were going to be released as part of a historic agreement. The Zolth Empire and human factions would no longer be enemies. They would be partners in trade and scientific exchange. When the resistance uprising occurred that night, there was no violence. Zolth soldiers met the freed humans with medical supplies and the plague treatment. Amanda and other resistance members were shocked to find that they did not need to fight. The gates of the labor camps were opened voluntarily. The freed humans were given the compound and then transported to safe locations. But the true test of Marcus's vision came in the weeks that followed. Humans and Xolth began to work together to distribute the plague treatment throughout the galaxy. Scientists from both species collaborated on understanding where the plague had come from and how to prevent such a thing from happening again. Gradually, the barriers between the two civilizations began to break down. Marcus was no longer a prisoner or a tool. He was no longer caught between two worlds. He had created something new, a path that did not require him to choose between human and Xolth. He had proven that compassion and cooperation could overcome even the deepest divisions. The Empire offered him citizenship and a position of permanent respect in their medical establishment. But Marcus chose something different. He chose to remain free, to travel between human space and Xolth territory, to share medical knowledge and to continue the work of healing. In the end, Marcus Sullivan had become something greater than either side had ever imagined. He had become a bridge between species, a reminder that the greatest strength of any civilization was not military power or advanced technology, but the capacity to see the value in all life, regardless of form or origin. 3 months after his victory over Commander Zrath, Marcus received a visitor to his quarters. The visitor came late at night when the medical facility was quiet. She was a human woman named Amanda Hayes, and her eyes held a combination of hope and desperate determination. Marcus did not recognize her, but she seemed to know him well. Amanda explained that she had been a prisoner in a labor camp in the lower sectors of the Xolth Empire for 5 years. She had heard about Marcus through the prison communication network, stories that spread from human to human about the doctor who had become respected by their alien captors. She told Marcus that human prisoners throughout the Empire knew his name and saw him as proof that humans could overcome any circumstance. Marcus felt uncomfortable with the reverence in Amanda's voice. He was simply doing his job as a physician. Amanda shook her head and told him that he was far more than that. She said that he had become a symbol of human potential and resilience. She explained that a resistance movement had formed among human prisoners, and they had been trying to contact him for months. The resistance, Amanda explained, was planning a coordinated effort to free human prisoners from camps throughout the Xolth territories. They wanted to organize an uprising and strike at the heart of Xolth control. But they needed Marcus. They needed his knowledge of the Xolth Empire's layout, security systems, and leadership structure. More importantly, they needed his credibility with the Xolth government to help execute their plan. Marcus listened with growing concern. He told Amanda that he understood the desire for freedom, but he also understood that any uprising would result in massive bloodshed. The Xolth military was far superior in technology and numbers. Any rebellion would likely be crushed, and countless humans would die in the attempt. He asked Amanda if she had considered peaceful negotiations for the release of prisoners. Amanda laughed bitterly. She told Marcus that the Xolth did not negotiate. They took what they wanted and disposed of those who were no longer useful. She explained that several human prisoners had died under torture in recent months, when they could no longer work. She asked Marcus how many more humans had to suffer and die before he decided that action was necessary. Marcus did not have an answer. He told Amanda that he would consider her request, but he needed time to think. Amanda understood. Before she left, she activated a small device that she pressed into Marcus's hand. The device would allow him to send encrypted messages to the Resistance network without the Xolth being able to trace the communication. She warned him that the messages would only work once every 7 days to avoid detection. Then she was gone, disappearing back into the night as silently as she had arrived. For the next week, Marcus struggled with the decision. He spent his days training young Xolth medical professionals and treating patients. He spent his nights thinking about what Amanda had asked him to do. He thought about the humans he knew were imprisoned in labor camps. He thought about friends he had known before his capture, people who might still be alive and suffering. But he also thought about the Xolth scientists and doctors he had trained, particularly Torn and Kesh, who had become his friends and colleagues. On the 7th day, Marcus sent his first message to the Resistance. He asked for more information about their plans, and for assurance that any action would minimize harm to Xolth civilians. The response came within hours. The Resistance promised that their operation would be surgical and targeted, focused only on military infrastructure and government facilities. They promised that they would try to avoid civilian casualties. Over the following weeks, Marcus became a double agent, though the term felt wrong to him. He was not betraying anyone because he was not truly loyal to any side. He was caught between two worlds, as he had been since his capture. To the Resistance, he provided information about the Empire's security systems and the locations of key facilities. To the Zolth, he continued his work as their most trusted healer. But then everything became more complicated. A new plague emerged. This one was different from the first. It was far more lethal and spread more quickly. Worse, it appeared to affect both Zolth and human physiology in similar ways. Within days, humans and Zolth alike were falling ill throughout the Empire and in the human labor camps. Marcus was immediately brought into emergency meetings with the Zolth leadership. High Regent Solvin told him that this new plague was unlike anything they had encountered. Their best scientists were baffled. They looked to Marcus for answers. The High Regent asked Marcus if he could develop a treatment in time to save their people. At the same time, Marcus received a message from Amanda through the encrypted device. The Resistance was using the chaos caused by the plague as cover for their planned uprising. They were going to move within 2 weeks. They were asking Marcus to help facilitate the escape of human prisoners from the labor camps. The message made it clear that this was the moment they had been waiting for. After this, they might not get another opportunity. Marcus found himself facing an impossible choice. If he focused on finding a treatment for the plague that affected both species, he might save thousands of lives but delay the human resistance. If he helped the Resistance escape, he would be abandoning the Zolth population to a potentially devastating plague and violating the trust that had been placed in him. Neither choice felt right. He spent an entire night in his quarters, sitting in darkness, trying to find a path that would not require him to betray someone, but he knew that such a path did not exist. Any choice he made would harm someone. Someone would suffer for his decision. The weight of this knowledge pressed down on him like a physical force. By morning, Marcus had made a decision, though it was not a choice between the two impossible options. It was something far more dangerous. He decided that he would not choose between saving one group or another. He decided that he would attempt to do both. He would work with the Zolth scientists to find a cure for the plague while simultaneously working with the Resistance to ensure that any uprising would have access to the medical treatment needed to survive. He sent 2 messages. To the Zolth leadership, he confirmed his commitment to finding a treatment as quickly as possible. To Amanda, he sent coordinates for a secure location and told her that he would provide her with the treatment protocols as soon as they were developed. He told her that he wanted the uprising to proceed, but only if humans and Zolth alike could be protected from the plague. The Resistance sent back a single word: understood. Marcus knew that his loyalty was now questioned on both sides. The Zolth trusted him because he had proven his medical skills. The Resistance trusted him because he was human and because he had agreed to help them, but he trusted neither group completely because he understood that both groups would eventually demand his total allegiance, and he could not give it. He was committed to something higher than either side. He was committed to preserving life itself, and that commitment would soon be tested in ways he could not yet imagine. The news came to Marcus during a routine evening in the medical facility. One of the young Zolth scientists he had trained, a promising researcher named Torin, approached him with a troubled expression. Torin told Marcus that Commander Zrath, a powerful military general, had been speaking against him in government circles. Zrath was arguing that the Zolth Empire had become too dependent on human methods, and that their reliance on Marcus represented a weakness in their civilization. Marcus listened carefully to what Torin shared. He understood that this was not just professional disagreement. This was about power and control. Zrath represented the traditional faction within Zolth society that believed in rigid protocols and proven methods. The idea that a human prisoner could teach them anything new was offensive to someone like Zrath. It challenged everything he believed about Zolth superiority. The situation escalated quickly. Commander Zrath demanded that the Zolth leadership halt the use of Marcus's treatment methods and return to purely Zolth-based medical protocols. He claimed that Marcus's approach was too unpredictable and that it relied on luck rather than sound scientific principle. Zrath presented carefully selected data showing cases where Marcus's treatments had not worked or had required adjustment. He ignored the overall success rate and focused only on the failures. The Zolth government was divided. Some leaders agreed with Zrath and wanted to reduce their dependence on human guidance. Others saw the success of Marcus's methods and wanted to continue. The situation created tension throughout the medical community. Some Zolth doctors who had learned Marcus's techniques began to question themselves. Others became more determined to prove his methods worked. Then the crisis came. A region of the Zolth Empire became infected with a new strain of the plague. This strain was more aggressive than the one Marcus had treated before. Commander Zrath decided to personally oversee the medical response in that region. He did not consult with Marcus. Instead, he ordered his doctors to use traditional Zolth protocols exclusively. He wanted to prove that the Empire did not need human methods to save their people. For the first 3 days, Zrath's approach seemed to hold promise. The infection rate slowed. Zrath announced publicly that he had been right, that traditional Zolth medicine was superior to human interference. But then everything changed. The patients who had received only traditional treatment began to deteriorate. Some died, others became severely ill. The infection actually accelerated among the population that had not received Marcus's compound treatment. By the end of the first week, hundreds of Zolth were dead. By the end of the second week, thousands were dying. The situation in Zrath's region became desperate. Families begged for the human healer's methods. But Zrath refused. He claimed that the outbreak was an anomaly, and that his methods would eventually succeed. He ordered more patients to receive traditional treatment, watching helplessly as mortality rates climbed higher. Marcus received reports of what was happening. He felt genuine concern for the Zolth people suffering in that region. He requested permission to go there and offer assistance. The Zolth leadership refused. They told Marcus to wait. The situation was politically sensitive. Zrath was a powerful military figure, and acknowledging that his methods had failed would create instability in the government. But Marcus could not simply wait while people died. He made a decision that could have ended his life. He went to the medical facility's communication center and began sending messages to Zolth doctors in Zrath's region. He explained his treatment methods in detail. He told them how to prepare the compound and how to administer it to patients. He knew he was directly defying the orders of the Zolth leadership, and he knew the consequences could be severe. What Marcus did not expect was how quickly his message would spread. The Zolth doctors in Zrath's region began using his methods immediately. Within days, patients who received the compound treatment began to recover. The recovery rate was dramatic and undeniable. Zrath tried to suppress the information, but the news spread through the population anyway. Families who had received Marcus's treatment, through the unofficial channels, began to speak publicly about how their loved ones had recovered after. Zrath's official methods had failed. The pressure on the Zolth government became overwhelming. Public opinion turned sharply against Zrath. The leader of the Zolth Empire, a dignitary named High Regent Solvin, made a public address. Solvin acknowledged that Marcus's methods had proven effective and that Zrath's approach had been a failure. Zrath was relieved of his command in the medical crisis, though he retained his military position. The government then faced a decision about how to respond to Marcus's unauthorized actions. Some voices called for his imprisonment or punishment. Others argued that his actions, while technically insubordinate, had saved thousands of lives. The debate raged for days. Marcus was brought before the High Regent to explain himself. Marcus stood in the presence of High Regent Solvin, knowing that his fate hung in the balance. He spoke clearly and honestly. He said that he understood he had acted without permission, and he accepted whatever consequences the Zolth leadership decided. But he could not have remained silent while people died when he had the knowledge to save them. He explained that in human culture there was something called the Hippocratic Oath, a promise made by healers to always act in the best interest of their patients. That oath had guided his actions. High Regent Solvin listened without interrupting. When Marcus finished speaking, there was a long silence. Finally, Solvin spoke. The High Regent said that the Zolth had much to learn about what it meant to prioritize life above all other considerations. Solvin announced that Marcus would not be punished. Instead, his methods would be officially adopted throughout the Empire, and he would be given even greater authority to train medical professionals and direct treatment protocols. But the victory came with a cost. Commander Zrath, now publicly humiliated, became Marcus's enemy. The traditional faction within Zolth society grew resentful of human influence. Marcus realized that his position had become even more precarious than before. He was no longer simply a respected healer. He was now a symbol of change, and there were many in the Empire who saw him as a threat to their way of life. The respect and authority that had been granted to him came with danger. There were those who would work to undermine him, to prove that human methods were inferior and to restore the Zolth Empire to what they believed it should be. Marcus Sullivan had won an important victory, but he had also made a powerful enemy, and the future suddenly seemed far less certain than it had only weeks before. The laboratory smelled strange to Marcus. It was a mix of chemicals he could identify and others that he could not. The walls were lined with equipment that seemed to combine biological and mechanical elements in ways he had never seen before. Holographic displays floated in the air, showing data that streamed past too quickly for him to read. A team of Zolth scientists worked at various stations. Their large, multifaceted eyes focused intently on their tasks. They paused when Marcus entered, their heads turning to observe him with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. The lead scientist was a female Zolth named Kesh. She had worked her way up through the ranks of the Zolth scientific community and was considered one of their finest minds. Kesh approached Marcus and used the telepathic translation device to communicate. She explained that their previous attempts to cure the plague had focused on chemical compounds and genetic therapies. Nothing had worked. Their patients continued to die. She asked Marcus what approach a human doctor would take to such a problem. Marcus took a deep breath and looked around the laboratory. He asked to see tissue samples from infected patients and information about the plague's progression. Kesh seemed surprised by his request. The Zolth scientists typically worked from theoretical models and computer simulations. They did not often engage in direct examination of biological material. However, something about Marcus's calm confidence made her decide to grant his request. For the next several hours, Marcus worked methodically through the samples. He used a microscope that was more advanced than anything on Earth, but the basic principles were the same. He observed the pathogen, watching how it attacked Zolth cells. He noticed something that the Zolth scientists had apparently overlooked. The pathogen was not just attacking the cells randomly. It was targeting a specific protein on the cell surface. The Zolth scientists had been trying to destroy the pathogen itself. But Marcus realized that the key might be to modify the protein that the pathogen used to enter the cells. He explained his theory to Kesh. His idea was unconventional by Zolth standards. Rather than following a rigid theoretical framework, he was suggesting a practical experiment. They would create a compound that would block the protein without harming the Zolth's own cellular functions. It was a delicate balance, but human medicine had developed similar approaches over centuries of trial and error. Kesh decided to try his method. Over the next week, Marcus and the Zolth team worked together, testing different compounds. Some failed. Some showed promise but had terrible side effects. Marcus did not become discouraged by failure. In human medicine, failure was simply information that guided the next attempt. The Zolth scientists began to understand this approach. Where they saw defeat, Marcus saw data. Where they saw the need for absolute perfection before testing, Marcus saw the wisdom of incremental improvement. On the 8th day, they created a compound that worked. In laboratory tests, the pathogen could not penetrate cells that had been treated with the compound. The Zolth scientists stared at the results in disbelief. Kesh turned to Marcus and acknowledged that his method had succeeded where theirs had failed. She asked him if he was willing to supervise the treatment of actual patients. The first patient to receive Marcus's treatment was a high-ranking Zolth official named Varthek. Varthek was dying. His skin had taken on a grayish-purple hue and he was barely conscious. The Zolth medical protocol would have been to apply standard treatments repeatedly, even though they had already failed. But Marcus suggested something different. He recommended treating Varthek with the new compound, and then closely monitoring his progress rather than applying additional treatments that might overwhelm his system. The Zolth doctors were reluctant. Varthek held an important position in the Empire. If he died under a new, untested treatment, there could be serious consequences. But Varthek's own family urged them to try. They knew their relative would die with standard treatments. At least this new approach offered hope. Marcus was given permission to proceed. He spent the entire first night monitoring Varthek's condition. He adjusted the dosage of the compound based on how Varthek's body was responding. By morning, Varthek's fever had dropped. By the second day, the gray-purple color began to fade from his skin. By the 5th day, Varthek was conscious and asking for food. By the 10th day, Varthek was able to walk. And by the 20th day, he was declared fully recovered and discharged from the medical facility. News of Varthek's miraculous recovery spread through the Zolth Empire like wildfire. The high official began telling everyone about the human healer who had saved his life. Within days, patients began arriving at the medical facility in increasing numbers. Marcus found himself working constantly, treating Zolth after Zolth. Some recovered quickly. Others required more time and adjusted treatment plans. But the success rate was far higher than anything the Zolth had experienced before. Marcus began to select promising young Zolth medical professionals to train in his methods. He taught them to observe carefully, to test hypotheses, and to think creatively about problems. He showed them that rigidity in approach was sometimes the enemy of healing. The young Zolth scientists were amazed by his methods and began to question the assumptions that had guided their own training. They saw that the human way of thinking about medicine was not inferior to their own. It was simply different, and that difference had value. Months passed, and Marcus's reputation grew throughout the empire. He was given access to resources that would have seemed impossible when he first arrived. The isolation of his prison cell seemed like a distant memory. He was housed in comfortable quarters and given nearly complete freedom to move through the medical districts. The Zolth leadership saw him as an invaluable asset, a resource more precious than rare metals or advanced technology. But Marcus was careful. Even as he worked to save Zolth lives, he was gathering information. He paid attention to the structure of the empire, the locations of military installations, and the attitudes of different groups of Zolth toward human prisoners. He discovered that there were still humans held in captivity throughout the Zolth territories. Some were workers in factories. Others were imprisoned in facilities much like the one where he had first been held. Through careful conversations with young Zolth scientists who respected him, he began to understand the Empire's strengths and weaknesses. He also began to understand that his position, while elevated, was not truly secure. The Zolth saw him as a tool, a means to an end. If the plague ended completely, if his usefulness diminished, his treatment could change at any moment. He was still in the most fundamental sense a prisoner. The only difference was that now his prison was far more comfortable and infinitely more complex. He had become someone they could not afford to harm, but someone they also could not trust. Marcus Sullivan had risen from captivity to respect, but he remained forever caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. Dr. Marcus Sullivan woke to the sound of alarm bells screaming through the corridors of the cargo vessel. His eyes snapped open in the darkness of his small medical cabin, and he could feel the ship shaking beneath him. Something was terribly wrong. He had been traveling to the neutral trade station at Kepler 7 with a shipment of advanced medical equipment and research materials. It was supposed to be a routine journey, but nothing about this felt routine. Marcus threw on his jacket and rushed toward the observation window. What he saw made his blood run cold. 3 massive warships surrounded them, their hulls painted in the distinctive metallic blue of the Zolth Dominion. The Zolth were a species known throughout the galaxy for their ruthless efficiency and their complete disregard for human rights. Stories of their cruelty spread across every spaceport, and now Marcus was about to experience them firsthand. The impact came without warning. The ship lurched violently, throwing Marcus against the wall. Sparks flew from damaged electrical conduits and the emergency lights flickered to life, casting everything in an eerie red glow. Through the loudspeaker, the captain's voice crackled with panic. The captain announced that the ship was being boarded and that all crew members should proceed to the escape pods. But Marcus knew that escape pods would be useless against Zolth firepower. He made a decision in that moment to hide in the medical storage bay and hope that somehow he would survive this encounter. Marcus moved quickly through the narrow corridors, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the heavy footsteps of Zolth soldiers echoing through the hallways. They moved with mechanical precision, their breathing apparatus hissing with each breath they took. Marcus had never seen a Zolth warrior in person, but he had heard descriptions. They were tall, standing nearly 8 feet, with tough gray skin that resembled stone. Their eyes were large and multifaceted, like those of insects, but their intelligence was unmistakable and terrifying. He ducked into the medical storage bay just as a squad of Zolth soldiers turned the corner behind him. The storage bay was filled with rows of containers holding medical supplies, diagnostic equipment, and research materials. Marcus quickly hid behind one of the larger containers and held his breath. The Zolth soldiers passed by his hiding spot, their footsteps thundering against the metal floor. For a few moments, he thought he might actually escape notice, but then one of the soldiers stopped and turned back. The soldier's multifaceted eyes seemed to scan the entire room, and Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as the creature's gaze seemed to lock directly on him. The next thing Marcus felt was a stunning blow to the back of his head. Everything went black. When Marcus awoke, he was lying on the cold metal floor of a holding cell. His head throbbed with pain, and when he reached up, he felt dried blood matted in his hair. The cell was small and sterile, with walls of gray metal and a single bright light fixture embedded in the ceiling. There was a narrow bunk bolted to the wall and a toilet in the corner. The door was solid metal with no windows, only a small slot at the bottom through which food could be delivered. Marcus had no way to know how much time had passed. Hours, days? The Zolth did not seem to have any interest in communicating with him. Guards periodically checked on him, sliding trays of bland, protein-rich food through the slot. The food was edible but tasteless, clearly designed to keep him alive with minimal consideration for anything else. His situation became clearer the more he thought about it. He was a prisoner of the Zolth Dominion, and he had no idea what they planned to do with him. Days turned into weeks. Marcus lost track of time in the isolation of his cell. He exercised to keep his mind sharp, doing push-ups and stretches in the limited space. He tried to practice medicine in his head, recalling anatomical diagrams and drug interactions, anything to maintain his professional knowledge. He wondered if anyone knew he was alive, if any rescue was coming, or if he would simply spend the rest of his life in this metal box. Then one day, the door to his cell opened. A Zolth officer stood in the doorway, taller than the others Marcus had seen, with scars running down one side of its gray face. Behind the officer, Marcus could see a group of other Zolth soldiers. The officer gestured with one of its four-fingered hands, signaling Marcus to stand and follow. Marcus obeyed, not seeing any other choice. He was escorted through corridors that were much larger and more impressive than the ones on the cargo vessel. He realized he was no longer on his ship. He was on a Zolth vessel, possibly even on their homeworld. Marcus was taken to a medical facility, a place that both fascinated and horrified him. The equipment was beyond anything he had ever seen, but it looked functional and efficient, like everything else about the Zolth. He was placed in a decontamination chamber and sprayed with a substance that smelled acrid and made his eyes water. When he emerged, he was given clean clothing and brought to an observation room where several Zolth officials waited. One of them stepped forward and began to communicate. The words came through in his mind, not his ears, suggesting some form of telepathic translation technology. The official explained that a plague had struck the Zolth population. Their best scientists could not find a cure. Many were dying. The official said that perhaps a human perspective might offer something new, something different from their own rigid approach to medical science. Marcus felt his stomach drop as he understood what was happening. He was not here to be imprisoned indefinitely. He was here to work, to use his medical knowledge to save his captors. It was an impossible situation. If he refused, they might kill him or use him in other ways. If he agreed, he would be collaborating with the species that had taken him captive. But as he looked into the multifaceted eyes of the Zolth official, Marcus realized that he had only one real choice. He had taken an oath as a doctor to preserve life, and a plague cared nothing for politics or the circumstances of captivity. Marcus nodded slowly and told the Zolth official that he would help. In that moment, he had no idea that his decision would change the course of his life, and potentially the fate of two entire civilizations. He knew only that he was still alive, and that as long as he had life and the knowledge to use it, he would do everything in his power to save those who were dying, whether they were human or alien. The Zolth official seemed satisfied with his answer and gestured for the guards to take him to the medical laboratories. Marcus Sullivan, a prisoner of the Zolth Dominion, was about to become something far greater and far more complicated. He was about to become the most respected healer in the entire Zolth Empire.